CBS News. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan Sunday on CBS.
Tonight, renewed concerns about protecting outdoor workers as the brutal heat wave takes a toll. Then, new details emerge after police search the home of the suspected Gilgo Beach serial killer. And what does the government know about UFOs? A preview of the historic hearing in Congress on the
The Trump agenda is not worth anything to Republicans if Trump's the one trying to execute it.
Liberal Democrats have been trying to destroy the Roberts Court for quite a while now because they don't like the outcome of certain decisions.
The only way you can investigate that is through an impeachment inquiry, so the committee would have the power to get all the documents that they would need.
It's largely to assuage the public that they're not keeping the idea of, alien craft from the public.
Hello, I'm Major Garrett in Washington, and welcome to America Decides. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is running against a candidate made famous by, in part, saying, "You're fired." Well, DeSantis now, not because he wants to, but because he has to, is saying, "Well, you're laid off." DeSantis is shedding more than a third of his campaign staff. He's let go of 38 people since the start of April in a bid to keep financially afloat through the fall. That number, 38, includes roughly 10 laid-off event staffers the campaign had previously announced were being let go. This move comes as DeSantis lags far behind former President Trump, that's the one who used to say, "You're fired," in national and early state primary polls. For more on all this, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Finn Gomez join us now. Caitlin is CBS News political correspondent. Finn is CBS News political director. Happy to have you both at the table. Caitlin, what do we know?
Well, this is, according to the campaign manager, an effort to streamline operations, to position them into the fall campaign, to make them competitive not only against the Republican field, but also against Joe Biden. But this also comes, as we've talked about before, where you just have not seen movement in this race. That's a kind of a remarkable difference from 2020, where we did see a lot of movement among Democrats at this time. It's summer. This is when people are heating up or cooling down. We've seen kind of a steady trajectory for Donald Trump. And then we have these early state polls, which this is where the decisions are made, are in these early states, that show that DeSantis has not he's not as competitive as many would like him to be, especially as someone who came into this race, kind of positioned himself as the person that could be that alternative to Donald Trump. And
Finn, let's take a look at some polling data that shows the favorability trajectory for Governor DeSantis over these past many months. Down by about 11 percentage points, if not more. So not only is his favorability suffering, his campaign, at least on the hard money side, the actual presidential campaign, we'll talk about the super PAC in a second, is having to tighten its belt.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Monmouth poll that you just referenced does show, in real numbers, his trajectory, and it's a downward spiral right now. Well, spiral might be a little strong. They're trying to avoid that. They're trying to fix the trajectory, right the ship, if you will. I have spoken to some of his rivals from other camps who've said that this has echoes of Scott Walker. It has echoes of Jeb Bush from previous cycles. Those are
two campaigns that raised a lot of money but couldn't manage it and ultimately flamed out.
Right, exactly. So
one earlier than the other, Walker much earlier than Bush, but they both flamed out.
Right, and I think it's early. Things change, as we know, but one senior advisor to another campaign said that they believe that DeSantis got lulled into this false sense of strength following the midterms. After that, when he was so high and he had the momentum, but didn't realize that a good day running as an incumbent governor is nothing compared to the worst day running as an incumbent governor is like an average day running for president. And that's what, in essence, he avoided media. He avoided, he only went to friendly outlets. And essentially this did him a disservice, really they're looking to right the ship. They're focused on the debate stage. We'll see if that could be a game changer.
Now, Caitlin, there are other examples on the Republican side. There are just a couple of campaigns going through a massive retooling and surviving. McCain did it in 2007, went on to become the Republican nominee in 2008. Ronald Reagan famously fired John Sears right before the New Hampshire primary because he lost in the Iowa caucuses in 1980. Oh, by the way, he becomes the nominee, two-term American president. So you can go through these harsh moments where we have to make tough decisions and bounce back. The DeSantis campaign clearly believes it can bounce back, but how?
Yeah, that they do, and they feel like there is enough time. There's 6 months before voters start to actually weigh in Iowa, so they feel like the fundamentals of the race that still exist, that he is best positioned, and that he has a story to tell. But the differences are: you mentioned McCain in 2007. You also have a trajectory of Jeb Bush in 2015, who fired a lot of people in October, had to rejigger the campaign. Campaign shakeups do happen; they happen for a reason. But that was an instance where it didn't pan out. He didn't win any of the early states and dropped out after South Carolina. The big question is going to be the debate, whether that can change the trajectory. But there's also this question of whether Donald Trump shows up to that debate or not. A lot of these candidates want him to be on the stage because they want to show, need him to be there because they need to show that they can be the alternative to him. If he's not there, they're kind of squabbling amongst themselves as their own kind of sub-team, while he can afford to evade some of these traditional environments.
And Finn, very quickly, Mitt Romney, Republican senator from Utah, had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal telling Republicans, look, if you're struggling later on in this campaign, meaning by January, February, you need to get out. Essentially saying donors can't make that decision. People close to those campaigns need to basically have an intervention to pull them out. I'm not sure if he's talking about DeSantis, but he's talking about anyone who's struggling early next year.
Yeah, he gave a target deadline of February 26, 2024. That's following the first primary state contest, of course, and and really in the crux of the primary race. The problem here is a couple things. One is Mitt Romney was the last nominee before Donald Trump in 2012. Party's changed a lot in 13 years, a lot. This is not the same party, and you can't really have that sort of coordination. It's very hard. It's like herding lions, if you will. This is not easy. Larry Hogan, when he initially was testing a potential run and bowed out before he really started, he essentially said the same thing. There's going to be a collision course where everything's going to be piled up right in the middle. That's kind of where we're going now, where there's this trajectory where we'll have this 12, 14 people in the race. You're going to have a pileup. So what Romney's saying is jump out by the 26th. He's saying the Republican donors and Republican movers and shakers should put that pressure. But again, will the Republican Party collectively listen? That is a big question that I do not believe it'll be very difficult for them to.
Romney made a good point, which is in that voters don't listen to people like him, people that are in charge of the party apparatus. They don't listen to a lot of these endorsements. Campaigns listen to donors because they have to. When the money dries up, the campaign has trouble moving forward.
Right. Money dries up from big donors, but if you're sustained by small dollar donors, you can hang around for a while. And who draws small dollar donors better than anyone else on the Republican side? It's former President Donald Trump. Right. Unquestionably, that is true. Control room, I can't hear you, so tell me where we are on time. 90 seconds. Okay, good. We can keep this conversation going. Let's talk briefly about the DeSantis super PAC, because that's the other part of the campaign. Very well funded. Yeah. These layoffs were on the campaign hard dollar sign. Finn, what can you say about the health of that super PAC and its relevance to the future of the DeSantis campaign?
Well, that's the pro DeSantis. DeSantis supporters point to that. They point to this juggernaut of fundraising that the super PAC has.
About $130 million.
$130 million, which is a lot of money. They say they can still fuel it. They're doing this unorthodox way of really, placing the grassroots operation and other elements are typically part of the campaign component into the lap of the super PAC. So they're saying, hey, all our big moves, everything, it's all fine. They're encased in its fundraising. However, polling numbers, right? We're looking at everything that the CHP cited, everything you cited, a major. I mean, those are the telltale signs that they need to do more. There has to be more of a fix, perhaps.
Having money and the ability to spend it wisely and productively, that's going to be a huge test for the DeSantis campaign. Finn Gomez, CHP, otherwise known as Caitlin Huey Burns, right. We thank you very, very much. President Biden signed a proclamation today to create a national monument honoring Emmett Till. The black teen was abducted and killed by white men in 1955 for allegedly whistling at a white woman. Those men who perpetrated that crime were later acquitted. President Biden spoke about the importance of knowing all of that complex, brutal, and painful history.
We can't just choose to learn what we want to know. We have to learn what we should know. We should know about our country. We should know everything, the good, the bad, the truth of who we are as a nation. That's what great nations do.
The monument also honors Till's mother, Mamie Till-Mobley, who pushed to keep the casket of her son open at his funeral. I spoke to Lonnie Bunch III. He's the secretary of the Smithsonian Institution about that decision and how it impacted the civil rights movement.
She decided that she had to have an open casket because she wanted the world to see what they did to her son. And that courage, it was horrible. And that courage, the fact that it was then published in a black newspaper and then it began over the world, it really rejuvenated the civil rights movement. And I would argue so much of the change of the 50s and 60s started from that moment of her courage.
Today would have been Emmett Till's 82nd birthday. Democrats and Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee are divided over a bill to mandate a Supreme Court code of ethics. We'll ask the bill's sponsor about that GOP opposition next. You are streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bringing virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery lamps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News. An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether.
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Welcome back to America Decides. With public trust in the Supreme Court wavering, and that's being generous, Amid scrutiny over the financial dealings of some of the justices, Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee are moving forward with a bill that would overhaul the High Court's transparency requirements. The bill would, among other things, require the court to adopt an ethics code, as well as impose more rigorous rules for disclosure of gifts, travel, and income. The legislation cleared the committee along party lines. Senate Republicans accused Democrats of playing politics.
Liberal Democrats have been trying to destroy the Roberts Court for quite a while now because they don't like the outcome of certain decisions.
Rhode Island Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse joins us now. He serves on the Senate Judiciary Committee and is sponsor of the Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act. Senator, good to see you. Briefly, tell us what the legislation would require that's not required now.
Well, it would require the Supreme Court to adhere to the judicial code of conduct that all other judges must follow. And to make sure that they do, it would actually create a procedure so that whether a justice is violating the rules or not actually gets determined by someone. It would also require more disclosure to match what members of Congress and executive officials are required to disclose about gifts of travel and hospitality and other things like that. It would require, when a recusal question is raised, that the justice write why they did or did not recuse, so that there's a record of some kind. And then it would require the much better disclosure of these little flotillas of what are called amici curiae, friends of the court, groups that come in and file briefs with the court. It's kind of last-minute lobbying with the Supreme Court before they render a decision. And a great number of them now are essentially fake organizations screening for big special interests. And we think that the groups that fund them and the real special interests behind them and whoever actually wrote the brief should all be disclosed.
And what would the public, in your opinion, Senator, learn that it can't learn now?
Well, some really simple things like how many gifts did Justices Alito and Thomas get from the 6 right-wing billionaires who have now been documented to have given them various kind of gifts? Second, with respect to Justice Thomas's recusal in the January 6th case, the simple fact that needs to be known to determine whether that was lawful or unlawful is what he knew about his wife's activities related to that case and when did he know it. So you'd get an actual answer to that question that would support a determination as to whether it was legal or illegal for him to have failed to recuse himself.
Senator, as you know, Republicans have said there are some very serious separation of powers issues involved here, that Congress ought not to be intruding on the Supreme Court's business. Your opinion on that?
That's one of the funnier arguments that they make because it has absolutely no merit whatsoever. In fact, if you look at the body that right now oversees the conduct of the justices and the federal judges, it's called the Judicial Conference, and it was established by Congress. And if you look at the requirement that they have for financial disclosure, that was a law that was passed by Congress. And if you look at the rules about recusals, those pertain to a statute passed by Congress regarding recusals. So essentially what they're saying is it is not Congress's business to look at how a body created by Congress is implementing laws that were passed by Congress. And that obviously makes no sense at all.
And address Lindsey Graham's criticism that the only reason Democrats are interested in this is because they don't like recent Supreme Court decisions.
Well, the more interesting point is that in the long, long markup of my reform bill, not one Republican on one occasion defended any of the reported misconduct by the justices. So they're trying to change the subject to how evil is the Democrats' motive, as opposed to, wait a minute, is there really a problem at the Supreme Court? I think the facts will show that there really is a problem at the Supreme Court. And some of our best witnesses, I think, are going to be federal judges who know where the guidelines are, what the rules are, and are getting increasingly irritated with the court for not following the rules and guidelines that they have to follow.
Speaking of good witnesses, would you like to see Justice Alito and Justice Thomas appear before the Judiciary Committee, and how willing are you to go to a subpoena if that's necessary?
I think in due course, it could be very valuable for them to testify and explain what was going on. But in the same way that a good lawyer prepares for a deposition before they go into the room with the witness, we need to be able to do the investigative work to find out exactly what went on, to see the documents. And at the moment, we're getting zero cooperation so far from any of the billionaires that we are pursuing who have been lubricating the court with free travel and hospitality and gifts.
So are subpoenas on the table, either for them or the justices?
I think subpoenas are a very natural result, a very appropriate result for Congress, established by law that we can do that if we continue to get a stonewall and no cooperation. Again, you do these things in proper sequence in a good investigation. So I don't want to get ahead of my skis, but clearly there is a path to subpoenas.
I want to ask you, Senator, about something that has gone on in Alabama. The legislature there, controlled by Republicans, is refusing to adhere to the high court's decision that it redraw congressional districts there to include a second majority-minority district. Your thoughts on what's going on there and a state's apparent willingness to defy a Supreme Court order?
Well, I suspect that this goes back to court, and the litigants point out what's happened and that the Alabama legislature just defied the Supreme Court. And then what ordinarily happens then, I believe, is that a special master gets appointed to manage the situation, and a court-approved map is produced. One additional point that I'll add, if the right-wing justices on the Supreme Court had not messed around with Shelby County versus Holder, had not done the damage that they did to the Voting Rights Act, none of this would be happening. The Voting Rights Act, the law changes that took apart these districts and set them up so that there were not enough majority black districts, that would have been held off by the Department of Justice early on. So this is the kind of conduct that you get when you have a Supreme Court that's willing to degrade the Voting Rights Act. And in this case, now they darn well better enforce their decision.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, we thank you.
Thank you.
Impeachment, it's a serious process, especially if the target is the President of the United States. And before you have impeachment, you must have an impeachment inquiry. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said today Republicans are moving in that direction against President Biden. We'll give you the details when we come back. You're watching America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why don't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman. Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Welcome back to America Decides. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is ratcheting up the rhetoric over the House GOP's investigation into the Biden family's foreign business dealings. McCarthy spoke of an impeachment inquiry into the president this afternoon.
Where's the truth? You've got to get to the bottom of the truth. And the only way Congress can do that is go to impeachment inquiry that gives Republicans and Democrats the ability to get all the information.
CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now from Capitol Hill. Scott, why is this the only way House Republicans can get to the truth? I thought the various hearings or the Oversight Committee and Judiciary and the like were the way to do that.
And Republicans control all the committees here in the U.S. House and all the oversight responsibilities and capabilities that come with it. Speaker Kevin McCarthy has used that phrase, impeachment inquiry, quite a bit over the past 24 hours. But we've noticed as this day progressed, and he's spoken about it again, there's a bit of softening in the language where he's speaking of it more philosophically or more theoretically now than maybe it was earlier in last night's interviews or how it was perceived overnight, saying it's a tool Republicans can use to get to the bottom of whatever they want to get to the bottom with in the Biden administration. But there's also this sense here, Major, and it's growing, from some Republicans that if they're going to employ an impeachment inquiry, better to use it first against President Biden himself. You'll recall Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has talked about impeachment of the Homeland Security Secretary, the FBI Director, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, and eventually the President. But there's others in the Freedom Caucus that say, let us begin with President Biden. There's only so much time and so much bandwidth. Kevin McCarthy is juggling all this, and it was noteworthy that he brought up the phrase somewhat unsolicited over the past 24 hours, then calibrated it as the day went on.
Scott, there's something happening tomorrow that I know you are eager to talk about. I want you to share some sound you've collected on it with our audience. Now, when I was growing up, we had the term UFO, unidentified flying object, but Washington simply cannot sit still. It must ruin a good acronym. We now have UAP, which is unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Thumbs down on that. Scotty, catch us up on what this all means.
I can't disagree with your verdict, but let's talk about what the U.S. House is doing tomorrow. A House Oversight Subcommittee is having an investigation into what the government has and it potentially is not willing to tell the public about these UAPs, which you and I call UFOs. Congressman Tim Burchett, Republican from Tennessee, will chair this hearing. He has said unequivocally to CBS News he believes the Pentagon or the U.S. government in some way has some evidence or some details about strange UFO landings, sightings, or hardware in its possession. He talked about one such UFO during an interview just yesterday.
Goes underwater, it comes out, no friction, there's no heat trail, no vapor trail like you would see traditionally from a rocket or a jet. What's the propulsion system? How is it doing this? So I think there's a lot of questions that the American public needs to know and deserves to know, frankly. And I don't trust a government who doesn't trust its people.
Here's what happens tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. 3 8 people who say they've had some type of witness or encounter with the UFO will testify to the U.S. House Oversight Subcommittee. They'll tell their story. Congressman Burchett will be leading with his own remarks. But the Pentagon has spiked a lot of this. They have said there's just no evidence that there have been UFO retrieval units inside the government, or that they're sitting on this cache of UFO equipment and hardware. But they're going to get quite a platform tomorrow, Major. One congressman who's involved with the hearing says they have media requests that they haven't seen before. International media, a tonnage of media. They have to RSVP in advance. There is, if nothing else, Major, a lot of interest in this topic.
And Scott, real quick, the Pentagon has been more forward-leaning in this space in the last 2 or 3 years, releasing a few more things than it had previously, right?
They have a task force. They have a sub-agency looking at all this. The National Archives just today released some of what they've had in their collection, UFO-related studies and details. But tomorrow, you're going to give a platform, a national platform here in Congress, to 3 people who say they've seen it with their own eyes or their own equipment. Let's hear what they detail and if it moves the meter with Congress or with others in the government.
As Scott McFarland well knows, the truth is out there. Thank you. That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You are streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all